Hello, my name is Aoife and I'm the Engagement Coordinator at the Commons Social Change Library, and today I'm here to talk to you about disinformation in the digital age. The purpose of this presentation is to provide you with some tips in how to spot disinformation, as well as useful tactics to prevent its spread within your community. Before I begin this presentation, I would just like to acknowledge that disinformation is not a new phenomenon. In fact, so-called Australia was established under the myth of terra nullius, which falsely claimed the land was empty and unowned, justifying the dispossession of Indigenous peoples and the denial of their sovereignty. This led to the violent seizure of land, destruction of cultural practices, and exclusion of First Nations from legal and political systems. It subsequently fueled systemic racism, entrenched inequalities in health, education, and housing, and disrupted the deep spiritual connection between First Nations peoples and their country. So to begin this presentation, I will first distinguish between disinformation and misinformation because they are two different terms, although they are often used interchangeably. Disinformation is defined as the intentional spread of false or misleading information with the actual intent to deceive and/or cause harm. For example, this photo references the 2024 rumor, which falsely claimed Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, were stealing and eating pets. This rumor turned into disinformation when proliferated by Donald Trump. The spread of this fake news had severe consequences for the local Haitian community, fueling xenophobia. In contrast, misinformation is the sharing of false or misleading information without malicious intent. For example, the deepfake image of the Pope in a trendy white puffer jacket represents misinformation, false or manipulated content shared without the intent to deceive, often for humor or by mistake. Today's social media landscape offers a prime environment for both disinformation and misinformation to thrive. Common forms of disinformation. Firstly, conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories are a belief that some secret but influential organization is responsible for an event or phenomenon. An example of this is the QAnon, which is a popular conspiracy theory that surfaced online in 2018. The core theory centers on its belief that there is a global cabal of Satan-worshipping, child sex trafficking elites who control governments, financial institutions, and the media. QAnon believes that the aim of the elite cabal was to undermine Donald Trump when he was president, steal the 2020 election from him, and erode his MAGA, Make America Great Again agenda. QAnon followers also claim that Donald Trump and his close circle are working to expose this pedophile cabal and bring its members to justice. Next, we have myths. Myths are traditionally understood as stories that explain the origin or history of a people, often involving supernatural beings or events to account for natural or social phenomena. Racial myths, however, were deliberately constructed to uphold white supremacy and are deeply rooted in historical systems of power and control. These myths were designed and perpetuated to justify exploitation, colonization, and oppression, presenting racial hierarchies as natural or scientific. Such myths were created through various means, including the invention of pseudosciences like eugenics, religious justifications, the development of racial stereotypes, and other strategies aimed at reinforcing inequality. As you can see, this photo here depicts Nazi officials who were measuring the nose of an ethnic German on the 1st of January 1941. The Nazis created pseudoscientific science, which was a system of facial measurements claiming it could determine racial ancestry. Deep fakes are videos or photos of people in which their face or body has been digitally altered so that they appear to be someone else. And here is an example.
One of the first deepfake videos that really gained national prominence was a video purportedly of Barack Obama.
How about this? Simply, President Trump is a total and complete dip.
But it was made by the comedian Jordan Peele, showing people just how good a deepfake video of a public figure can look. The problem is, this video looks pretty real. So sometimes you'll see little inconsistencies between when you hear the audio and when the lips move. Or sometimes the face might appear a little wooden.
Stay woke.
So, why do people actually spread disinformation? There are many reasons people spread disinformation, but often it is to manipulate, deceive, or gain a political advantage. So politically, it is often used by politicians to discredit opponents, sway public opinion, or polarized societies. We hear this talked about a lot at the moment. While financially, it generates revenue through clickbait or fraud. Some spread disinformation to promote ideologies, recruit followers, or destabilize communities by undermining trust in institutions. Others intentionally pollute the information landscape with conflicting narratives to confuse the public, making it harder to discern truth from lies, which fosters apathy or distrust in reliable sources. Additionally, it may be driven by malice or revenge, or even for amusement, disregarding the harm caused. It is, of course, important to note that people who share disinformation are not necessarily doing so with the intention of causing harm. They often genuinely believe the information they are sharing. An example was the 2023 voice referendum in so called Australia, which has since been referred to as the post truth referendum. During this campaign, the Conservative No didn't really present any arguments against the actual proposal, but instead they flooded the information landscape with misinformation, disinformation, misleading, and conflicting information with the purpose of confusing voters. Some of the things they did was they made people believe that if the voice was to get up, it would have a veto power, so it would have the power to veto legislation, or that it would result in people's land being taken back off them, all of which, are legitimate requests from a lot of First Nations people. But essentially, the aim of this was just to stoke fear and to leave voters feeling that they were actually not able to make an informed decision. And this was really clearly underpinned by the campaign slogan, "If you don't know, vote no." So now we move on to how does disinformation actually work? Here are some of the tactics that are used to manipulate people. First, we have satire and parody. This is used to avoid scrutiny, making false claims appear harmless or humorous, but leaving audiences unsure of the truth. For example, during the Voice referendum, a satirical Facebook post created by an anti-Voice supporter showed a fake ballot paper for the Indigenous Voice to Parliament referendum that only allowed voters to select yes. While intended as satire, some users took this post seriously, questioning the authenticity of the ballot paper, while others recognized it as a joke. Then we have propaganda, which presents one-sided perspectives and aims to evoke strong emotional reactions in its audience. For example, in November 2024, Israeli and Western media misreported events surrounding a football match between Ajax and Maccabi Tel Aviv in Amsterdam, falsely characterizing confrontations as a pogrom against Israeli fans. This mischaracterization served to deflect attention from Israel's actions in Gaza and portray Israelis as victims, demonstrating how disinformation can actually be weaponized as propaganda to shape public perception and political discourse. And finally, we have clickbait. This often uses exaggeration or misleading information to spread disinformation. Sometimes news outlets use clickbait in order to gain revenue because there will be a paywall behind the article itself. And so you put a really kind of controversial or compelling headline, which makes people want to click and want to read more. In this case, you can see that the headline is enough to actually do the damage. It uses strong emotive language like war on landlords and hated policy that could force you. It's clearly trying to stoke fear in the audience, and it's doing enough damage just through that extremely long headline that people don't actually need to read more and probably read more information that will actually provide them the context or further understanding that is beyond just fear mongering. Then we have tactics used to create false legitimacy, such as imposter content, which creates misleading content that looks like it's from legitimate sources or respected news outlets to give disinformation false authority. The anti-trans movement often uses imposter content through creating fake experts to spread misinformation about transgender people. These individuals often lack genuine expertise in transgender healthcare or related fields, but present themselves as authorities to legitimize transphobic views and push ideologically driven misinformation. Then we have fake personas, which use fabricated credentials to lend disinformation false authority and credibility. For example, as shown in the Netflix series Apple Cider Vinegar, which is based on the true story of Belle Gibson, who was a disgraced influencer who fabricated a cancer diagnosis and recovery story. Gibson claimed she had cured her brain cancer through alternative therapies and diet, which she promoted through her wellness app, The Whole Pantry, and a cookbook. And finally, we have deep fakes, which we talked about a little bit previously. And essentially, they create fake audio or video or photos, making it appear people said or did things they didn't, fueling disinformation and mistrust. For example, recently in Australia, health professionals have been being impersonated in deepfake ads promoting unregulated supplements for type 2 diabetes. They're concerned the fraudulent ads may lead people to stop taking their medication. These are all examples of tactics being used in the health sector. I'll also show you a video now of the use of deepfakes in politics.
Is deep fake technology going to be the future of election campaigns, not just in South Korea, but indeed around the world? Take a look.
AI 윤석열입니다.
I'm Al Yoon. Thank you for your comment. I really like Blackpink. Do 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 especially is my favorite song.
Meet Wiki Yoon, a deep-fake AI model. But no ordinary model. Wiki Yoon is a deep-fake of presidential candidate Yoon Suk-yeol.
질문 감사합니다.
He was created here, in a crowded campaign office in Seoul.
That was a lot of information in terms of what actually is disinformation, how to spot it, all those kinds of things. And now you might be asking, what can you actually do about it? So here are some things that you can do personally to stop yourself falling for disinformation and perpetuating disinformation. Think before you link. Some of the compounding factors that make social media such fertile ground for the spread of dis and misinformation is the existence of echo chambers, algorithms, and the fact that often when we are using social media, we are trying to take a break, trying to relax, not think too much about the world, not think too much about our jobs, our school, whatever it is. So we're often what we colloquially call doom scrolling, right? But the problem with that is that we are not in the zone where we are critically thinking at all, generally speaking. So I'm not saying that we can't doom scroll, but what I am suggesting is that before you share, before you like, before you tell someone something that you've seen on social media, think before you link. And these are some really important questions that you can ask yourself, including who is sharing the news? Is this a reliable source? Why might they be sharing this news? What impact is it actually trying to have on me? What is their agenda? And who could this harm? And I think this bit is really important. You might not immediately be, elicit a response by seeing this news because it might not be harming you. So you might not recognize that harm. It's really important to step back and realize, okay, well, just because it's not harming me doesn't mean it's not harming anybody. So who could it actually be harming? And why might someone want to be harming, said minority group, for example? Which brings us to practicing critical thinking. Here are a few things you can do to help enhance your critical thinking skills. One of them, I think, is just to first acknowledge the existence of confirmation bias, which is hard to acknowledge, I guess, and to bring attention to because it does actually operate on an unconscious level, and it really does affect our ability to process information. But if we first acknowledge that we have bias and that we will be more inclined to believe disinformation if it confirms our worldview. And I think that's something we are absolutely all susceptible to, regardless of where you sit politically and how much you think that you, are not likely to fall for disinformation. We absolutely all are. And the more that we can acknowledge the existence of bias, the more effective we're going to actually be at tackling disinformation and enhancing our critical thinking skills in general. The other thing is to recognize that things are complex and nuanced and not black and white. So seeing the world in good versus evil, black, white, that kind of like polarized way of thinking is very unhelpful. So embracing the complexity of everything, I guess, can help improve our ability to think critically. Then one that can be quite challenging is letting go of the need to be right. So letting go of our ego a little bit, being humble, accepting that we might be wrong. We're all wrong at sometimes, and putting ourselves in other people's shoes to help understand their perspectives. Then be on the lookout for ulterior motives and vested interests. This is a bit of a mantra to take home with you. Check your source. Always check the source. Now we're going to move on to some of the approaches you can take to actually supporting others who are affected by disinformation. Firstly, we have debunking and mythbusting. So debunking is the act of exposing or disproving false or misleading information, which involves providing evidence or facts that contradict the claim, often after the misinformation has already spread. Mythbusting, similar to debunking, involves exposing widely held beliefs or misconceptions that are not based on facts. So it actually involves addressing myths in an entertaining or engaging way, typically to educate the public or challenge popular but false ideas. So it's also important to note that there are a number of weaknesses with these approaches, and there will be certain campaigners or organizers who would advocate or who would suggest to not use debunking and myth busting, or to use them only when it's absolutely necessary as a kind of last resort. So here are a few of the reasons why. Repeating false claims, even to debunk them, can actually inadvertently reinforce the misinformation in people's mind, which we call the backfire effect. And to add to this, debunking can also expose new audiences to false information that they hadn't previously encountered. Also, focusing on debunking myths takes away time and resources from telling a compelling, values-based story that could be more effective in shaping opinion. And finally, even if debunking succeeds in changing a specific belief, it rarely alters people's overall attitudes or behavior, because people often form opinions based on values rather than fact. We'll talk a little bit more about values-based messaging and story soon. So, fact checking is definitely still an important tactic used to help support others who are being affected by disinformation and to help the spread of disinformation in the digital sphere. When it comes to fact checking, remember, Google is your best friend. Although, remember to check the legitimacy of sources you are using to fact check, including not to rely solely on the automated AI response that you get when you first Google something. At the very top, you'll get an AI response. Please do not rely solely on that. Please read more than one resource, do your research, and in general, do not rely on AI for fact checking. It's really important that you do your own research. You can also use existing fact-checking websites or social media accounts to help you discover the truth. And on the next slide, there's an example of some of the social media accounts in Australia. And I'll also show you a video from MediaWise, which is a youth organization in Canada that uses TikToks to debunk and fact check and share really interesting creative videos online.
I don't know about you, but caffeine always helps me get a much needed energy boost. But this reel says otherwise.
That's because when you have ADHD, caffeine has the opposite effect on your brain.
Is it true that caffeine has the opposite effect on people with ADHD? Let's find out. The first thing I did was to ask what we call the 3 questions. These can help you verify or debunk just about anything online. First, who is behind the information? I looked at the account that posted this, and it's from a company called Thera that sells weighted hoodies, which does not sound like an expert on the topic. Then I asked, what's the evidence? In the reel, there is no reference or link to a specific study or any type of data in the bio or caption. That's a red flag. This led me to the third question. What do other sources say? I started with a keyword search of caffeine affects ADHD research study. I saw this new feature called AI Overview pop up, which can be really useful, but isn't always 100% accurate. So it's important to follow the links and double check the info, or even to scroll past it to look for other sources. By doing that, I found this study, which tested how animals with ADHD were affected by caffeine. They found that the caffeine helped these animals, but noted how the study wasn't done on humans, so it's hard to say how caffeine would affect people with ADHD. I also found this study, which asked people how caffeine affects their ADHD. They said it did nothing. Last, I came across this article that says caffeine has been found to help some people with ADHD and not others. Because there's no definitive evidence that backs up this claim, we rate it as not legit. When you see scientific claims online, it's always good to take a deeper look.
So, you may have experienced a friend or family member sharing disinformation online. As someone close to them, you're in a good position to start a conversation about it, but these conversations can be difficult, especially with loved ones. Here's a couple of useful tips for having challenging conversations. Firstly, be open-minded. Even when you're going into a conversation intending to change the other person's opinion, it is really important to be open-minded and listen actively to what they have to say. Have empathy, be patient, stay calm with challenges, and try your best to avoid arguing. Take deep breaths, that can help. Be respectful. Ask questions that encourage critical thinking, like who told you that, what evidence do they have, and why might they be saying that. Avoid shaming or dominating the conversation. Always know what you are talking about, and make sure to encourage critical thinking. Remember, changing someone's opinion isn't about winning an argument in the moment. It's about planting a seed that might take time to grow. People rarely shift their views instantly, especially on deeply held beliefs. Instead, they need time to process, reflect, and encourage new experiences that reinforce a different perspective. A good persuasive conversation isn't about forcing someone to agree, but about opening a door. It's about introducing new information in a way that resonates, making them curious rather than defensive. The goal isn't immediate conversion, but gradual transformation. Keep planting seeds. Some will take root, some won't. But the more seeds you plant, the more likely change will grow. We all know the right is dominating much of the public conversation. That's why it's crucial for us to claim space in the information landscape. Storytelling is one of the most powerful ways to do this. Storytelling is an effective means to present accurate information on important topics, counteract misinformation with personal experiences and verified facts, engage your peers with relatable, truthful narratives, and help fill social media feeds with credible content, potentially drowning out disinformation. A really good example of this is the 2023 Passing the Message Stick messaging guide, which was a collaboration between GetUp and Australian Progress that used values-based communication and story-based strategy to promote First Nations justice. The guide provides responses to common questions, aiming to counter misinformation and build support for First Nations self-determination. For example, on the right here, you can see the messaging guide, which discourages the use of statistics and jargon in exchange for values-based statements. It also encourages the use of strengths-based language rather than deficit language. The guide also includes a conversation toolkit to address common questions and concerns, providing story-based responses to counter misinformation and build support for First Nations self-determination. And finally, we have creating coalitions. So the really important thing to remember about disinformation is that it literally affects all of us. It affects the entire sector, it affects every movement, it affects us all. So rather than go about it alone with just our organization, just our group, or just by ourselves, it's really important that we find others, other groups, other organizations affected by the same kinds of mis and disinformation to coordinate a response. For example, the European Misinformation Response Coalition, which is a collaborative effort to combat misinformation, particularly during critical electoral periods. It operates by pooling expertise and resources from various organizations, institutions, and fact-checking bodies in order to create coordinated campaigns to combat disinformation in Europe. And I'll leave you with these final tips. Remember the mantra, check the source. Always verify information before sharing and avoid spreading misinformation. Don't feed the algorithm. Avoid engaging completely with harmful content, as any interaction you have with it can boost its reach. Have a group plan. If you're in a group, decide how you respond to disinformation together. And remember, you know your community best. Trust your understanding of your environment, the people around you, and the challenges your community faces. Apply what you've learned to your context. Use these tools and insights to navigate disinformation in ways that make sense for you and your community. Because together we can build stronger, more informed, and resilient communities. Thank you for listening, and for more information, visit thecommonslibrary.org.